Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 15th, 2023. Time for another show, etc., etc. And by all accounts, Greg Dworkin preparing to make an appearance, despite the fact that he hasn't recovered 100%. But he says he's got a little bit of show in him. So we'll give it a shot, see how things go. I think the voice is probably okay to hold up, and he estimates about half an hour. But you know. These things tend to stretch out, and there's some him talking, some me talking. So if we can spread the half hour of him talking over the course of an hour, it might work. But we don't want to strain anything, that's for sure. But he's got a raft of stories prepared, so one way or another, we'll get those stories to you. If the voice doesn't hold up, I'll use mine, and why not? Let's get all the stories out there and reported. There are plenty to go around, to be sure. As it turns out, the Instant Pot company story really has kind of exploded all of a sudden, and it's everywhere, and I'm not really sure why everyone is so fascinated by that, but I guess for the same reason. It has to be for the I'll say it's for the same reason as we were fascinated by yesterday. It's just weird that a company that makes good things that everybody likes is going out of business, and everybody's kind of annoyed by that, and why not take every opportunity you get to pick on the locusts and the vulture capital places. So everyone pointing that out. Darwin, by the way, reacting to yesterday's story by saying that the air fryer attachment that they have, Instant Pot, is a must-have game changer. And I have it. So I'm covered on the must-have part. I saw that the other day. I went to, another company that was going out of business, Bed Bath & Beyond, or well, at least they were going into bankruptcy, maybe reorganizing and emerging, maybe for the same reasons, for all I know. But they were advertising that they were closing their stores, and we were there to try and see if we could pick up a few items. I guess in the last couple of days that they were honoring their previously ubiquitous 20% off any item coupons, which I always felt they were distributing them in such great volume and with such great regularity that I figured it was some sort of, more a marketing ploy than any sort of discount. Like, these are the prices we're normally going to charge, but why don't we bump them up by 20% and then give out lots of 20% off coupons? And it seemed to work for us anyway. And that's what we bought with ours, because we were thinking about, maybe we should try one of these air fryers. It was stupid because we have nowhere to put anything. And then we saw, it's a top that just fits on your Instant Pot, which we already are taking up space with. So why don't we just do that? And you can just put the top on, but of course there's already a top, and it ends up being a storage problem just the same. But we bought it and it seems to work, except we had no real experience with other air fryers, so I have nothing to compare it to. And ultimately, all air fryers are limited in the space, their capacity. And as it turns out, it's very difficult to air fry enough things to eat all at once. And you got to fry them and then, dump them out somewhere and keep them warm and then make another batch. And it's kind of annoying. But it was an interesting way of getting an opportunity to experiment with air fryers. So I admit, yes, that's true. It changed the game in terms of us being able to store everything from our kitchen. That's certainly true. Then, there's air fryers and everything now. I was out the other day looking at grills because ours was collapsing finally after a billion years, and we were going to replace it. And there are some grills now that have air fryer baskets like built into the grill somehow, and I think that's just a step too far. Anyway, let's see other things we have to round up. There are plenty of them. As I said, something that caught my eye that I wish I had seen it yesterday or Tuesday rather, to talk about with Joan, but I guess we kind of did talk about it with Joan now that I think about it, and the Hill is just catching up with it, I suppose. Maybe that's really the way that we ought to be discussing it, and say we had this news, sort of, kind of, on Tuesday, and the Hill now running the headline, "Shutdown odds grow amid GOP infighting." We'll get to the details of that one. perhaps a little later, but for now, just sort of setting the table for Greg. Oh, and one thing I wanted to take care of before Greg came on. As it turns out, the LIV in Live Golf, I found a story about it, and it was headlined, "What does LIV in Live Golf stand for?" I still don't know how they say it, but as it turns out, hey, Greg, I wanted to tell you that the LIV actually, it is Roman numerals for 54, as it turns out. 54 holes. They play 3 rounds of golf instead of 4 like a PGA tournament. So 54 holes of golf are played. They went with the Roman numerals. I still don't know whether they just say Live Golf or whether they say 54.
They do say Live Golf.
Okay.
But it's 54 golf. I mean, it's just what it is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's 54 holes of golf, and they have weird formats, and there are teams. And it actually sounds kind of interesting, except for the whole, human rights disaster, torture, murder angle. Anyway, How you doing?
I'm okay. I'm
All right.
recovering from a viral illness. I took care of my grandkid, and he's in daycare.
Yes. So now you are
and
too.
these things happen.
Right. You used to be highly immune, but you've taught us all about how
There's
fleeting
new stuff,
immunity can be.
recombination and new viruses,
Sure.
and obviously this is one I hadn't had before.
Yes, and I imagine
So thank you, grandson. I mean, that's what
okay.
they're for, right?
That's yes, right.
The
You
little
give
Petri
them
dishes when they go to daycare,
yeah, you give them ice cream or money or stuffed animals, and they give you illness.
right?
It's excellent. All right, well, I'm glad you got a chance to visit and also a chance to recover, and you got some things to say probably.
Yeah, but not for long. I think my voice will probably last for about a half hour.
Okay.
today.
Well, let's use it on good things.
And I'm heavily going to hit the mute button there.
Okay. Well, I will too. I'll start muting randomly, so it sounds like we're both doing it.
Right.
Both sides.
So you'll invoke cloture on me when needed. So the things that were catching my eye today, sure. I mean, the House is dysfunctional.
It is.
We said that from the beginning. We said that the so-called strong Kevin McCarthy win was actually a weak Kevin McCarthy barely skated through with his life. And now it's becoming clear to everybody, including those on the Hill.
Mm-hmm. I can hear you struggling.
Yeah,
If at any point it becomes too much, tough luck.
I will. Which we could tell because, now people are realizing, hey, the conservatives didn't go away. They're mad at him. They still want a pound of flesh or 7.
Yes.
And they may simply shut the government down over it because they can't win, but they have to have a temper tantrum.
Yeah, well, they're going to have that regardless. It's a thing that they do, even if they're not mad about anything in particular. But yeah.
So somewhere between now and when this is resolved, you will have to give a master class on what the term the Senate is going to jam the House means, because that's how this is going to get resolved.
Okay. Jam the House. I see. All right. I think I know what they're talking about.
Well, the Senate is going to say, look, it's the House's job to do appropriations bills and all this other stuff, but you're not doing your job, so we're going to do it. Send it over to you. You're going to have to sign it because we have no choice, and screw you.
Yeah. That's one of the things the Senate likes to do to the House very frequently. The House will work, well, I was going to say work hard, but they work for a long time on crafting a bill, and then they forget there's another House you got to get through, and when it's in when the majority is in the hands of the other party, this happens a lot, but it even happens when it's in the same party. The Senate says they want their way, and they say, we have the problem of the filibuster. You have to change what you're doing over in the House in order to get us around our own filibuster. So
right. You have to fix our problem because we can't fix our problem. And the House says, no, you have to fix our problem.
Right. They have lots of problems now, so they can trade this in both directions.
So welcome to American divided government.
Woohoo! Okay, it does happen even when both houses are in the same. But you get somebody who's a little more either conservative or possibly liberal in the Senate versus the House version of the same party.
Well, it usually happens when the House is just completely recalcitrant, which happens often enough so that we've seen it a couple of times in our lifetime.
Yes. I've seen Democrats do it when the House is more progressive than the Senate, which is frequently the case, and they send over something that progressive piece of legislation they work very hard on, only to have the Senate say, sorry, Joe Manchin or something like that says no.
But, the thing to note is in the end, the House just about always loses.
Yeah.
That battle.
And they dislike it, and they are constantly scheming to find ways to stick it to the Senate, even if it's like 6, 10, 15 years later and doesn't make any sense. So,
right. So, some comments on the Tuesday arraigning and Trump court appearance.
Yeah. It was interesting.
The media handled it like a circus, but there was nothing to see.
Right. Not in any of the rings.
Right. So they had a lot of talking heads that said a lot of things. Very little of it was interesting. But Andrew Weissman had a couple of very interesting observations. First of all, the thing about Aileen Cannon is that although she has a lot of power to disrupt things, the Department of Justice does have the ability to appeal some certain things. It's just that she has to act and screw up first for that to really be effective.
Yes.
And the downside is if they challenge her on something and they lose the challenge, then you get a pissed off judge on top of everything else.
Yes.
So conservative, law folks, and most law folks are conservative about their practice, tend not to do that unless they think they have a really strong win, which would only happen if she screws up, which is likely, but that's the sequence of events.
Mm-hmm. Most likely. Yeah, that's kind of how we discussed it. It's the most likely play is that they wait for her to do something that's actionable, which means terrible, and then target that, as opposed to, it is true that you could make the claim, she's made it very plain, very obvious that she's biased for Trump. They should start right from the beginning. Don't even let things begin under her. But it's just not the way legal practitioners tend to operate.
Right.
So, and it would be easy to find yourself back in court with that same pissed off judge if you jumped the gun and tried to get her removed and the circuit court said, we think she's learned her lesson from the last
What's
review.
What's not likely is that she's anything other than Susan Collins. She's not going to learn her lesson.
Nobody really thinks so, but we have to wait and prove that that's the case. That's the way court stuff works.
Right, but court stuff. She was twice remanded by the 11th Circuit.
Yeah.
The second one even worse. But the point being, she doesn't learn.
No.
And the thing is, she is too inexperienced to understand that she's not experienced enough.
There's a lot of that going around in the GOP side of things these days.
And that's a problem, when you want to get stuff done. But that wasn't the interesting thing that Andrew Weissman brought up.
Oh. Well.
He was on Morning Joe,
and
he was talking about a couple of things that are missing in this Florida case that involves obstruction and national security.
The Iran document's missing.
Well, Trump calls it a documents case or a box case, but that's not what it is. It's obstruction and national security.
Yes, that's true.
And the trial has to take place in Florida because that's where the crimes were. Okay.
Yes, the obstruction ones, yeah.
But Weissman noted, but there's something even worse than having national secrets and also obstructing the ability to carry out an investigation as to why that's so.
Mm-hmm. There's something.
The more, the worst thing is if you have the documents and you show them to people.
Yes,
that's bad.
It is.
Okay, but that didn't happen in Florida.
That's true.
That happened in Bedminster.
Yes, or that's
and
where
the Bedminster showing of documents, and there's two that have been reported. Including the famous tape, I guess. You want to see this? Oh, you shouldn't see this, but look at this.
I shouldn't be showing this to you. He loves saying that, though.
From the indictment. And Weissman speculates that if for some reason Aileen Cannon screws everything up, they can still file charges against the Bedminster revealing of secret documents it would be New Jersey, not Florida. Aileen Cannon has nothing to do with it. It's a separate case. They're not trying the same case twice, and so that's in their back pocket.
All right, that's a good point. I was wondering about, because they do cite the Bedminster exchange in the indictment, but they don't
make it a charge.
Yeah.
And that's what Weissman was focusing on. And says, well, if they knew that, why is the charge missing? And here's part of the answer, maybe.
Yeah. That's good. There were probably some examples of sharing the confidential or classified information that happened in Florida as well, but I don't know. Maybe they just don't have the all the evidence that they need for those. But the one in New Jersey should be pretty open and shut, although I'm sure he'll argue. That wasn't the actual paper that I was showing. I mean, why not just lie and say that?
I was a double agent. I was showing them something completely different,
Yeah.
I was showing them the New York Times Sunday Puzzle and claiming that was the Iran war plan.
Right.
You can't tell that
because
it's
They just thought I was regular crazy.
You can't tell that because it's a podcast. It's not cable.
Yeah, that's basically, well, all right. That's an interesting thought. Definitely the idea that there should be charges related to that. And it's a gaping hole in the indictment unless they're planning on charging him elsewhere. And you really couldn't put it in the Florida indictment. Although you could make some
apparently Weissman says you could if Trump allowed it. Trump can somehow, petition to get all the cases put together.
Oh, well, yes, he could do that. He can consolidate the cases. And I was thinking that maybe DOJ could say, well, it happened in New Jersey, but there's a Florida nexus. These are boxes that he had loaded onto his plane in Florida by Walt Nauta. And yes, he showed them up there, but for the crime committed in Florida, the New Jersey crime couldn't have taken place. And you can
point being, it's not impossible, but they chose not to.
All right. Yeah. I hope that's the reason, because that would be fun. Also, it would just be fun arresting and indicting him in another state.
Right.
Okay. Cool. For that. I mean, it's speculative.
But because it's irresponsible not to speculate, Weissman goes on to say,
oh, yes.
And what if they're not keeping it in their back pocket in case the Florida case goes awry? What if they're simply going to indict him?
Yeah.
It's just they haven't done it yet.
That too would be fun. I mean, I'll take another indictment. That's always welcome.
On an even more serious charge. So that you have a series of escalating things. You had the Florida obstruction. You shouldn't have had them. You didn't give them back. You have the Bedminster. You showed it to people you shouldn't have. And then you have the D.C. Oh, by the way, you also tried to overthrow the government. And you do them sequentially, but not that far apart, so you can get them all in. Yeah. And why not? Maybe that's what's happening.
Maybe. And it wouldn't be bad if I'd indict him on all three simultaneously at some point so that they were all overlapping. It makes for a great, otherwise inadmissible piece of extra evidence to tell the jury, you were not meeting today in the obstruction trial, the federal obstruction of justice trial in Florida, but only because we're meeting on the espionage trial in New Jersey instead. So the defendant's absent to face his espionage charges in New Jersey today. Sorry, jury.
Yeah.
But you can't discuss that. I'm just telling you what the schedule is. I'm not introducing it as evidence against him of an act outside the scope of this indictment. I'm just telling you what's happening.
It's like that scene out of the Three Musketeers, where the new kid on the block winds up challenging each of the Musketeers to a duel 1 hour apart, having just met each of them.
It seems like it.
That's D'Artagnan. He runs into Athos and gets into, okay, well, we'll settle this with a duel. And then a few minutes later, he runs into Porthos and, we'll have a duel, but I can't do it at 12 because I'm otherwise booked. I'll have to duel you at 1. And then runs into Aramis and, we got to settle this and there's only one way. But I'm booked at 12 and 1, so I'll have to duel you at 2.
I like going into duels with confidence.
Right.
All right.
The kid is good. I mean, there's no question about it. But nonetheless.
All right.
That's what's going on. The other story of note that I want to at least touch on.
All right. We can allow that, but you have to wash your hands afterwards.
I know. Computer viruses and all that. So Steve Kornacki tweeted, the new Quinnipiac 24 GOP poll conducted June 8th through June 12th.
Mm-hmm. Didn't know they had one.
Trump 53, DeSantis 23, Haley 4, Pence 4, Scott 4, Christie 4, Ramaswamy 3.
It was a trend of 4s, but sorry.
Right, general election matchup, Biden 48, Trump 44.
3 is pretty remarkable for him.
48 to 44. So
okay.
What's remarkable about it is, as G. Elliott Morris and a few other people note, Bill Scher noted the same thing.
Okay.
If you think that Trump is going to win because he's diluting the field, since he's above 53%, everybody else could drop out and support Ron DeSantis, and Trump still wins.
Oh. Yeah, well, okay. Bad.
So basically, Trump is polling fairly strongly, bigly, in this primary. So
Yes, if
the indictments aren't hurting him, will probably not hurt him. Sarah Longwell was on PBS reporting some focus groups she did in Iowa. And basically, there are a whole group of Trump voters who said, I don't believe anything we hear.
Yeah, not surprising.
How do we know what the FBI really did when they, invaded Trump's home? Maybe they just planted evidence. There's those people. You're never going to convince those.
Right.
And then there was a group of people who said, well, what he did is criminal and really not right and bothers me. Will you vote for him? Well, yeah.
There's plenty of those, too. Not a lot, but there's enough to do
so you
something.
have those people who basically say, look, this is my team, and I'm simply voting for my team. Okay. Now, these are people who voted for Trump twice. Yeah. And a focus group is not a poll.
Election.
And so the point there is, and yet you do see the beginning, the loosening, and Nate Cohen had a nice piece about this. I don't have it at my fingertips, but he basically wrote the same thing. You could see some weakening. You could see Mike Pence say what Trump did was wrong. And if what's in the indictment is correct, that's terrible. Yeah. You could see Chris Christie say it. You could see Nikki Haley say it, Mike Pompeo. There's a number of people who are prominent Republicans who were associated with MAGA world who nonetheless say that rather than dismiss the indictment outright, which is the day they did after the indictment, now they're saying, well, I read the indictment, and it's actually pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, they laid out the facts pretty good there. They did an excellent job telling a story.
Right.
And they know that everybody else has read it, too, and they've read that same story, and it's easy to understand.
Well, everyone in politics has read it. Voters haven't read it, and they're not going to read it.
Oh, well, I did. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to.
No, but it's like, you go to your general average everyday normie voter. Well, have you read the Mueller report? What are you kidding?
Well, no. Here's what it says. Yeah.
I mean, I vaguely remember there was one, but no, I didn't read part 2. I didn't read part 1. I'm not going to read it.
All right.
It's freaking War and Peace. What's that got to do with baseball?
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll find a way to serialize it and put it on Hulu.
But if the people running, Christie, Pence, those folks bring it to the debate stage, they're going to hear it, even if they didn't read it.
Guess so. Yeah. Chris Christie's certainly going to say it. That seems to be his
The rest of them are starting to say it. My point is that Biden already has a 4-point lead in the polls, and that's not going to close because other people are attacking Trump over this indictment. It's going to widen.
No, you wouldn't think so. All right. I'm prepared to receive that extra boost in the polls.
I'm just saying, sure, I understand why people are so solely focused on the Republican primary. It's important. You can't ignore it. It's coming up first. But
we'll stop talking
the primary has nothing to do with the general.
Okay. Yes.
And primary voters are not general election voters. And most general election voters think Trump did something wrong.
That's the key point, obviously.
They don't have to read the indictment to know that they think he did something wrong. And then if other indictments come, be it Bedminster or Fani Willis and
right.
Georgia,
It's almost August.
or January 6th in
Not
D.C.
really, but-
There's a lot he's going to have to answer for. And so that's my show for today. I just thought those were two interesting topics we should talk about.
Okay. Well, yes, and everybody is talking about them, so we are too. So mission accomplished in that sense.
Yeah.
And brave, good
thank
on you for
button.
trying it. Yes, and thanks for giving it your best effort. I know I can hear it's a little bit of a struggle, so go rest.
Oh, I sounded a whole lot worse on Monday and Wednesday, I promise.
I'll bet. Okay. And hopefully you'll, with the extra couple of days to recover, everything will be back to normal by Monday. But it was nice to hear from you and just to check in so everybody could hear that you're okay. This is a proof of life.
Proof of life, but I do a great frog imitation.
Yes. I can hear it's tough.
As
All right.
I croak my way through the show.
All right. Well, we got about 30 seconds or so before the music even begins. And not that you're responsible for that. Okay. Yes, you could try that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we need to.
Hey Doc, when I get better, will I be able to sing? It's so weird. I was never able to sing before.
Right. Well, good. It's good that you're in good enough spirits to tell all the good medical jokes.
All the dad jokes, right? The dad jokes are actually important.
Yes, and a measure of your ability to recover. I think what I wanted to talk to you about, which I guess we'll wait until Monday. I have is a good excuse if everything's on the up and up by Monday. What's happening overseas? Things falling apart in United Kingdom all over the place, less united than ever before. Problems in Scotland for politicians there. Boris Johnson again in the news and again in trouble. So we ought to catch up with our UK friends at some point. I know you enjoy that as a topic. Maybe we'll save it for next week. In the meantime, feel better, and thanks for giving it your best shot today. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, that are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Thanks again to Greg for coming by just for the first half hour today. I know it was tough, but we appreciated hearing from you after a couple of days absent. I mentioned, did sneak in before we started the segment, that the LIV in Live Golf does stand for 54 holes. Still no word, though, about how they actually pronounce it, and I think it probably is Live Golf as opposed to Live Golf, but at any rate, that was a surprising bit of information. I thought he was just kidding when he came up with the Roman numerals explanation. All right, another story that begs for our acknowledgement, if not lengthy treatment. A story that I saw the other day through other channels, but which Scott pointed out to me via Bird Channel earlier today. Because Scott Charles had seen it, which is, and Scott had said basically I don't know, his comment was like, the most American headline you'll read today. I saw this story the other day, but this one has a little bit more detail in this ABC local Chicago news treatment of it. Not that I can see it because I got to get rid of this pop-up ad first. Chicago area man shoots himself while dreaming of intruder. Then arrested on gun charges. In other words, it's another one of these people who sleeps with a gun in their bed because they're worried that intruders will come in the night and not give them enough time to retrieve their gun from, let's say, the safety of a gun lock or gun safe, and then confront them, even though they usually invent elaborate Home Alone break-in type traps for their intruders. and consider themselves, of course, to be tactically trained, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is, when you really think you're in one of those situations, I guess, well, for one thing, you want to simplify things, and for another, you probably think you have to react very quickly, although people are usually skulking around downstairs as opposed to... Well, anyway, the point is he sleeps with a gun in his bed, probably one of those people that sticks it under the pillow. Not the first person I have seen shoot themselves in their sleep, but the first one to shoot themselves and presumably admit to responding authorities that they were having a dream about an intruder and thought that they were shooting an intruder, only to wake up and find out that they had shot themselves. I'm not certain whether there's any deeper psychological meaning to that, but I've definitely read of stories of others who sleep with a gun in the bed and have accidentally shot themselves, or others who were in the bed with them. Happens, Shouldn't, but then... there shouldn't be a gun in the bed. That's basically what it said. So this is from Lake Barrington, Illinois. The story goes like this. An Illinois man shot himself in his sleep with a .357 Magnum, no less, while he was dreaming about an intruder breaking into his home, officials say. The odd thing was, in the dream, it was a Glock 9. So, I don't know. I can't explain the difference. As if wounding himself in the leg was not punishment enough, and they do frequently say, "You've suffered enough." But no, you haven't. The man ended up being arrested because his firearms owner's identification card had been revoked, according to the Lake County Sheriff's Office. So he's one of those law-abiding gun owners who doesn't abide by the law. That happens a lot. The incident happened April 10th, but we're only finding out about it now, I guess, for some reason. Sheriff's deputies responded to the home in Lake Barrington in the northeastern suburbs of Chicago that night around 9:50 p.m., on a report of a person being shot by themselves while dreaming. They found Mark M. DiCara, 62, with a wound to his leg, and it's lucky it was his leg, and losing a significant amount of blood. Deputies applied a tourniquet, and he was then transported to an area hospital for treatment, the sheriff's office said. Investigators said DiCara had a dream that someone was breaking into his home, prompting him to grab his 357 Magnum revolver and shoot at what he thought was an intruder. It was a giant leg breaking into my house, and he was very hairy and wearing pajamas. He shot himself and then woke up with a gunshot wound to the leg. That'll wake you up, I think, if the noise doesn't do it, I guess. The problem is I sleep with earplugs, so I had to wound myself in order to know that I was shooting in my dream. Anyway, let's see. The bullet went through his leg and was lodged in his bed, the sheriff's office said. Fortunately, the round did not travel through a shared wall with DiCara's neighbors, the sheriff's office observed, and that is a good observation. We frequently find that people do that as well. I don't think the designers of the Second Amendment had in mind apartment complex living in those days, but it doesn't even matter. Even detached single-family homes, we frequently find that the walls are not nearly as robust as you think, and people are shooting into one another's homes all the time. Ironically, those, of course, are home invasions. This one would have happened while he was dreaming of a home invasion, which would have just doubled the irony. Let's see. The sheriff's office said there was no burglary attempt at DiCara's residence and that he possessed a gun despite having his FOID card revoked, which usually means that he's a dangerous guy for one reason or another. Either he's got a criminal conviction, a felony conviction, or he's had a gun accident before, or I don't know, maybe he didn't fill out the paperwork right. I'm not certain why. The Lake County State's Attorney's Office then charged DiCara with possession of a firearm without a valid FOID card and reckless discharge of a firearm. You were sleeping. DiCara was arrested Monday and has been released after posting bond. And then he shot the bail bondsman in his sleep. I mean, the bail bondsman sleep. Everybody was sleeping in this story. So, just another crazy gun fail story to remind you that guns don't shoot people, dreaming people shoot people, and you're probably making a mistake if you're thinking about stashing a gun in your bed. All right, what about that GOP infighting that I mentioned? The Hill was reporting on. Mike Lillis and Emily Brooks have this bit to add to the commentary we got from Greg earlier. Shutdown odds grow amid GOP infighting. How so? The decision by House Republicans to write spending bills below the caps established in this month's bipartisan debt ceiling deal sets the stage for a clash with Democrats in the Senate and the White House and heightens the odds of a government shutdown later in the year. You will probably recall Joan saying that there was some question about whether the figures in the deal were supposed to be a ceiling or a floor, and in all likelihood, the Democrats involved, whether from the White House or Congress, involved in the negotiations. When you enter into, debt-focused and spending-focused negotiations, you probably think that any caps you hit are just that, caps, that they are ceilings, not, and they can't be, they can't really be floors because you're not supposed to build anything above it. But it's a rare thing, I guess. Democrats are not attuned to the idea that the numbers that you come up with in a negotiation like that are something that you would try to come in below, like significantly below. You try not to hit them. That, in that sense, you want to come in below them. But ordinarily, appropriators, even Republican appropriators, usually are hard-pressed to find the cuts that they need to get down to the caps, and they don't want to cut any further. But I guess this group of Republicans actually does. And will that change the dynamics or the way people view the deal? The debt limit legislation, negotiated by President Biden and Speaker Kevin McCarthy, featured an agreement to set new top lines on discretionary spending over the next 2 fiscal years. So in that sense, top, right? Top line. Yet McCarthy, under heavy pressure from his right flank, has since balked at those figures, arguing they're not the target levels, but merely represent a spending ceiling Congress cannot surpass. But that's what they actually were defined as the first time around. Behind Representative Kay Granger, chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Republicans intend to mark up their 2024 spending bills at lower 2022 levels, estimated to cut an additional $120 billion in federal outlays. Those cuts are a non-starter with Democrats, whose support will be needed to pass the appropriations bills into law and prevent a partial government shutdown on October 1st. The dynamics set Congress on a collision course in September over the size and scope of government spending, a debate complicated by the conservative threat for McCarthy to hold the party line on deficit reduction or face a challenge to his speakership. But, there are plenty of angry people now who are mad and keep invoking at least the idea, the threat of vacating the speakership, and they couldn't get their act together, so I don't know whether McCarthy is well served by worrying about it or not. Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, has said Democrats will oppose anything less than the agreed-upon debt ceiling levels. Representative Rosa DeLauro, senior Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, said the GOP strategy all but guarantees a shutdown, and Pete Aguilar, chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, delivered a similar warning, saying House Republicans will never win Democratic support for their spending cuts, but they might very well succeed in shuttering the government. Of course, I don't know whether it's discussed later in the article, but I recall Joan telling me that if they don't finish their appropriations bills, not only would there be a partial or complete government shutdown, but they would trigger even more draconian cuts, including cuts to defense, which now you have to wonder. I know Republicans, or some substantial portion of Republicans, say they would be determined to avoid cuts to the military. I wonder, though, whether the Democratic caucus, how they feel about it. Like, look, if there are going to be draconian cuts made to the sorts of domestic programs we want to protect from further cuts, we very frequently say, well, if you need to cut more money, cut military spending. Maybe these additionally triggered cuts aren't the worst thing in the world. Maybe they play that up and say, well, we think that the pain should be shared equally, and failing to pass these appropriations bills makes it more likely that the pain will be shared across the entire federal budget, not just the parts that we tend to care about. And since we were planning on voting against your appropriations bills anyway, what the heck? We're basically telling you there's almost no way you're going to get any Democrats to vote for this. So Republicans are going to have to do it all by themselves. And if there are Freedom Caucus nuts who want even more cuts and also vote no, then you're going to find yourself triggering defense cuts that you swore you weren't going to do. But Kevin McCarthy doesn't care about being called out for doing something he swore he wasn't going to do by Democrats. He cares about being called out that way by Republicans who might try to vacate the chair. All right. The conservative threat to McCarthy's power, he added, it's Aguilar still talking here, created a situation where the tail is wagging the dog. You remember where we left off? These are the deals that Kevin McCarthy has to make in order to hold the gavel, he said. Muddling the issue is a disagreement between McCarthy and his conservative detractors over the precise nature of the concessions he made in January as he struggled to win their support for his speakership. The hardliners maintain McCarthy promised to fight for 2022 spending levels in 2024 and refuse votes on any proposal above that level. That was the agreement in January, maybe not, who knows, that the Speaker would not put legislation on the floor that exceeded 2022 spending levels, Representative Matt Gaetz said Tuesday, but that guy's under ethics investigation, so who cares? Yet McCarthy has disputed that account in no uncertain terms. We never promised we're going to be all at 22 levels. I said we would strive to get to the 22 level, or the equivalent of that amount in cuts, the Speaker said earlier in the month as he defended the debt ceiling deal from conservative critics. That legislation, dubbed the Financial Responsibility Act, or FRA, if you want to abbreviate it even further, included an incentive to Congress to pass all 12 regular appropriations bills in a timely manner. There's the number for you, 12. If the appropriations are not made by January 1st, they extended themselves an extra couple of months of deadlines, then any continuing resolution, or CR, as we know them, would have to cap spending at 99% of current levels, a 1% across-the-board cut that would affect even military spending, but only by 1%. That threat is already spooking defense hawks who are warning of the harm to national security in the age of great power competition, particularly with Russia and China, but a growing number of lawmakers appear increasingly resigned that a CR will be necessary, setting up yet another showdown between House Republicans and Senate Democrats. My guess is we'll go ahead and pass the CR at the 99% level, said Representative Gary Palmer of Alabama, Republican. And if there's a shutdown, it'll be the Senate that shuts it down. But the January 1st sequester date leaves some uncertainty about what would happen when the new fiscal year starts on October 1st. Yes. Some members of the House Appropriations Committee were already feeling the time crunch, and they now have even more pressure after Granger's announcement on spending levels. Now the House must quickly pass those bills, and the Democratic-controlled Senate, which is sure to reject the House GOP spending levels, will have to act. There is a prospect that we could be at an impasse come into September, said Representative Steve Womack, Republican of Arkansas, a subcommittee chairman on the House Appropriations Committee. This governing majority of ours doesn't need to be toying around with shutting down the government, Womack said. McCarthy has also said he will not bring up any omnibus legislation that combines appropriations into one large package, further complicating the timeline. Wow. Congress has not passed all 12 regular appropriations bills on time, and I guess separately, since 1996. Though there's some wiggle room in there too, right? McCarthy could say, and you'll find Matt Gaetz saying he's lying about this too. McCarthy says, well, I won't bring up, it says here, this is not a quote, but I won't bring up any omnibus legislation that combines appropriations into one large package. Can I bring two omnibus bills, two smaller packages? Maybe, yes. Or can I bring one omnibus bill? We'll pass like one or two regular appropriations bills, leaving 10 left to pass, and then I'll bring one omnibus that has the 10 remaining bills in there. I said I wasn't going to do it with all 12 in one omnibus. So then there'll be a dispute about that. But if it's strictly interpreted and no omnibus bills are allowed, yeah, they're going to run into some problems. They don't have the ability to pass 12 of these things, I don't think. Many hardline conservatives, for their part, say they're not threatening to force a government shutdown to get the spending levels they want, at least not yet. We're trying to get on the same team, Republicans, to focus on spending cuts. I don't think anybody wants a shutdown. I sure don't, said Gates. They can't talk to any normal people. Oh, well, they are talking to a bunch of other Republicans. I don't know why. But it's annoying that they keep returning to Gates. Representative Dan Newhouse, especially if Gates really isn't a Freedom Caucus member. Shouldn't they be talking to one of them? Anyway, Representative Dan Newhouse, a Republican of Washington, a more moderate, maybe, that's the word you have to use these days, member of the House Appropriations Committee, called discussions of a shutdown a little premature, yet others are downplaying the severity of a shutdown, arguing the nation's soaring debt poses an even greater threat to the nation's economic well-being. I'm not worried about a shutdown, Representative Ralph Norman said. The country is going to be permanently shut down if we don't get our spending under control, and I'm tired of hearing we'll do it tomorrow. We're going to do it now, or attempt to. Well, it's always good to try to do things now rather than do them tomorrow. It's just that the premise is wrong. We're not going to permanently shut down the country, and that's stupid and whatever. That's, I don't know. That's the kind of nonsense they love to engage in. It's a bit of a throwaway line. But now we know where they are and what to look out for. But it's not happening this week. So what do we want to spend the rest of our day on? And plus we got tomorrow to get to the more, the weirder or more esoteric news. And maybe we want to lay the groundwork. I've been talking up this UK stuff for so long, but I know Greg wants to. Well, maybe this will be Greg's reading on it too. But first, how about more about the former guy from Dahlia Lithwick? So it's worth doing. I guess the only thing that Dahlia Lithwick has written about the former guy in the last 2-3 days that I haven't read yet, I think. She wrote this for Slate just the other day, asking what will come from this indictment, or rather, I think, stating to us plainly, as a matter of fact, what will come from this indictment. Is the rule of law finally coming in for the win, or has it made itself irrelevant? Or is that two sides of the same coin? Good question. In the two places we call America, she starts, already controversial, there are now two coups simultaneously unrolling at breakneck pace, and also possibly grinding to a slow but steady halt, as double coups sometimes do, I guess. I don't know. This is okay. For those who maintain that Donald Trump is an innocent man, subject to an unjust witch hunt at the hands, large hands, of deep state actors who covered up Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's criminal conduct, it's go time. As Representative Andy Biggs put it on Twitter the other night, when Trump was indicted, we have now reached a war phase, eye for an eye. How real are these threats? Jeff Charlotte laid it out thusly in The Atlantic. Back to Jeff here for this one. Do they believe what they're saying? Do they mean their violent implications? Does it matter? Their civil war is imaginary, but there really are men with guns, more now than I've seen in 20 years of reporting on the right. So, does it really matter whether they believe it or not? If one of them starts shooting and panic starts happening, I don't know. Whether they plan to act on it or not, in the view of the most steadfast, violent Trump supporters, the coup actually began with James Comey, with Robert Mueller, with Adam Schiff. Eye for an eye, for an eye, for an eye. We never know how many eyes are being taken here, but that's why it makes the whole world blind. It now steams forward under the lawless powers of the prosecutor currently pursuing Trump, whether that be Alvin Bragg, Fani Willis, Jack Smith, take your pick. These villains are, quote, weaponizing, to use the preferred nomenclature, the power of law enforcement and the justice system to persecute Donald Trump. For them, all bets are off. The promise of violence shimmers in the air. On the other hand, sit those who believe that the slow-rolling coup is perhaps finally coming to an end, thanks to the justice system finally, grindingly, belatedly, kicking into high gear. For the America that contends that the walls are closing in, or finally might be, the indictment of Donald Trump and the forthcoming trial signal that the rampant lawlessness of the Trump years and the stochastic terror of January 6th, 2021 are finally being checked with the appropriate degrees of legal and judicial and law enforcement authority. For those who feel that Donald Trump has been an uncharged criminal defendant for years, maybe decades, the fact that he's been roaming around the country running for re-election this past weekend is, in fact, the problem. That he is still issuing veiled threats against his opponents borders on unbelievable, as does the idea that he might still become president. In this story, the long national nightmare is finally wrapping up thanks to the tender, if belated, mercies of criminal statutes, sentencing guidelines, grand jurors, and knowable facts. It occurs to me as I was reading through this thing whether, see if I can find it anytime quickly, but Peter Manso had a summation of the situation just the other day, which I thought was apt, and let me see if I can find it quickly. I don't think it was all that far back in his timeline. Let's see. Well, maybe it's a little further than I thought. But basically he was saying, here it is. So let me get this straight. This June 13th, he made this comment, and that might coincide with when this article was actually written. So let me get this straight. If the Trump trial can't happen fast enough, like it's soon enough to convince people not to vote for Donald Trump for president because it happens, they delay it until after the election so as not to affect the outcome of the election. If the trial can't happen fast enough, there's nothing to be done but hope enough people in the right states show up to vote. Otherwise, an indicted sociopath hell-bent on vengeance becomes the most powerful person on the planet. Is that about right? And, that pretty much sums it up. So, back to Dahlia Lithwick's telling of it, though. So where were we? Yes, Richie, we just concluded this paragraph. Let's wind it up again. That he's still issuing veiled threats against his opponents out there. That's incredible. And as is the idea that he might still become president. In this story, the long national nightmare is finally wrapping up, thanks to the tender, if belated, mercies of criminal statutes, sentencing guidelines, grand jurors, and knowable facts. The other alternative explanation, the walls are finally closing in on him, which means that we've officially reached peak Schrodinger's coup. Might be happening, might not be happening, right? Democracy is either alive or dead inside that box, and everyone is too afraid to look inside and say which it is. And this, in turn, puts us all in the unenviable position of having to reckon with two conflicting truths. Yes, the legal walls are closing in, and as they do, for some, the power of these legal walls is crumbling before our eyes. It's blinding. The more criminal trouble Trump finds himself in, the more his political capital rises. The law may, in fact, be powerless in the face of that simple truth. I used to fret that politics would always outrun the law, that a Trump lie or threat or boast would make it twice around the world while the justice system was still just putting its socks on. It's usually pants and that formulation, but okay. But increasingly, I think we're not even running the same course or playing on the same field or moving toward the same ends. The more the rule of law triumphs, the stronger the forces that hate the rule of law actually become. And that, of course, is the end game for the Trump team. What I have been hearing from Republicans that I've spoken to is frustration, a growing frustration. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez told Fox News Sunday, the trust in our Justice Department has been eroded as well. These are core institutions in a democracy that must have the people's trust. When you see things like this that have political overtones, it's very frustrating for people. His remarks are honestly tame compared to those of many of his fellow Republicans who are in Congress. They have made the unprecedented decision to attack the law itself. In other words, the more unimpeachable the facts laid out in the indictments are, the more apt Trump defenders are to spew lawless nonsense in his defense. This indictment, arraignment, trial, and possibly conviction will not persuade the Trumpiest of Trumpsters to nod their heads soberly and agree that the facts speak for themselves. Even when a disgraced Bill Barr brings himself to say as much, he immediately renders himself irrelevant as a legal expert in their minds. It is Lindsey Graham telling George Stephanopoulos on Sunday that, quote, most Republicans believe we live in a country where Hillary Clinton did very similar things and nothing happened to her, who ends up doing the real Trumpist legal work here. He's offering up the possibility that what's happening to democracy is whatever you want to believe is happening. If you think it is slowly being poisoned by atomic gases inside the box because the former president is getting his comeuppance, finally, well, the senator is here to give voice and amplify that belief. Put aside for the moment the will she, won't she drama of a possible Aileen Cannon recusal. The totality of the legal debate here is not about whether or not Donald Trump was in possession of classified documents, because he was. I mean, that's pretty open shut, but not about whether or not he was in possession of those documents which imperiled national security, or whether or not he conspired to hide those documents, or whether or not he and others conspired to lie about it. That is all demonstrably true. We are, to the extent that there is a legal fight taking place, bickering over whether the president can declassify documents with his mind alone, and whether the Presidential Records Act gives a former president the right to do whatever he wants with anything ever, even when it threatens national security. Well, almost nobody ever believed that until, well, this week. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We jumped out to our 1-minute break in the middle of a paragraph from Dahlia Lithwick, but it felt like the end of a paragraph because it really built to a crescendo there. Again, just pointing out to the extent that the fight that's taking place is legal at all or has anything to do with legalities, we find ourselves bickering over rather ridiculous, quote-unquote, legal premises that are held on the right. Whether or not the president can declassify documents with his mind alone, and whether the Presidential Records Act is any kind of a defense. Because, again, they're running around the country saying that that's their defense when it, in fact, hangs them. If you just read what he did versus the Presidential Records Act, you violated it. It's no defense. Yeah, but I'm just going to say it over and over. So we're at that stage of that game. We are now almost exclusively fighting over whether, if you are Donald J. Trump, you are allowed to walk around with highly classified documents, to show them to biographers without security clearance, to hide them, and to lie about it. Because when you are Donald J. Trump, what you feel like doing at any given moment gets to be the very definition of the rule of law. To the extent there is a legal debate occurring at all, it's about whether, per Richard Nixon, when the former /ex/real president does it, it's legal. Yes, relitigating Nixonism and Watergate. And by the way, the Cheneys as a family used to be in favor of that. Interestingly, the current spokesperson for the Cheney family, politically speaking, who's on her way out now, I guess, because she's been unseated by the Republicans, is against that, as it turns out. Or gimmitarian entirely. It was cool when Nixon did it, but terrible when Trump did it. I don't know. Going into each of these next steps, the court appearances and possible arraignments, the near certain future or further indictments, there will be heavily armed people who are increasingly certain that they are the very last bulwarks against an unjust effort to overturn democracy that has been orchestrated by Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, the deep state, and the feds. There will also be many of us watching the opening stages of a long overdue process of judicial and legal accountability for clear violations of criminal laws and sighing with relief. We will, to be sure, be watching the very same movie and concluding that the system of American justice and law enforcement is either irretrievably shattered or more robust than we were led to believe. It's choose-your-own-ending democracy for the pundit class, in which law is an end in itself for one side and a means to a political outcome on the other. As was the case in Charlottesville in 2017 or at the Capitol in 2021, the legal experiment is being distorted. It will end in either a fair trial with a reasoned outcome or in more acts of stochastic terror and vigilantism, or both. That one party is rooting for the former while the other is determinedly not disavowing the latter tells us a good deal about how we got here. The system is either broken or it's working as intended. Whether the thing in the box is gasping for air or shaking off a rough patch, the enduring worry is that the state of American democracy now exists almost entirely in the mind of the beholder. That is an interesting, I don't know how you fix that. It's just an interesting observation, and glad we were able to get it on the record. And, all right, let's see. Other things to catch up on. Let's see, we heard about the Gates ethics probe restarting. We never really did read the entirety of the story about George Santos and his lawyer being a January 6th guy, but there's also a story about a staffer being involved in something, and I don't think it's huge, but let's see if we can get it on the record, because we want to know all we can know about George Santos and what he's up to. David Korn and Jacqueline Sweet reported this. It's been a while now. Well, I guess it was probably about a week ago, June 8th. Is that last Thursday? George Santos's lawyer was part of the January 6th mob. That's the part we know. Let's get the details, get the name, etc. What have we here? From Mother Jones, which I guess I'll be reading in pocket format. George Santos, the lying and indicted GOP congressman from Queens, New York, as opposed to the lying and indicted ex-president from Queens, New York, has steadfastly refused to say where he was on January 6, 2021, while pro-Trump rioters were, of course, attacking the U.S. Capitol to prevent the certification of Joe Biden's electoral victory. He was filmed that day in the VIP section for Donald Trump, for the Donald Trump rally at the Ellipse, rather. I didn't even know that was the case. George Santos was there at the Ellipse. But his post-rally whereabouts remain a mystery. Yet newly uncovered photos and video footage of January 6 showed that his attorney, Joseph Murray, was in the angry pro-Trump mob that trespassed on Capitol grounds. Archived footage obtained by Mother Jones from that day traces the movements of Murray and Angela Ng, who is identified on the website of Murray's law firm as its office manager, as they marched from the Ellipse to the Capitol. Both Murray and Ng are retired New York police officers. Oh, I didn't know that. Ng is also currently listed as working for Santos in his Queens district office as a constituent services representative, according to Legistorm. Part of the throng of irate Trump loyalists, Murray and Ng passed down barricades, entered restricted grounds, and made their way up the steps of the north side of the building. There they watched and Murray filmed as hundreds of rioters nearby broke doors of the Capitol and poured into the building. Murray has represented Santos ever since Santos' surprise election to Congress last year triggered an avalanche of controversies and probes. When Santos appeared in federal court on Long Island on May 10th and pleaded not guilty to 13 counts of money laundering, wire fraud, and stealing public funds, Murray was next to him. Murray has regularly showed up in news reports declining to comment on the latest Santos revelations. Murray, who was arrested for felony assault in 1993 for breaking the jaw of a fellow cop, but later not indicted by a Manhattan grand jury, ran for Queens District Attorney in 2019 as a pro-Trump law and order Republican, because he's assaulting people left and right as a cop. During that campaign, Murray often told the tale of his arrest and his subsequent legal battles. He lost to Democrat Melinda Katz by 79,000 votes. He and Santos have been political allies since at least late 2019. appearing together on podcasts and at Queens Republican events, according to multiple Republican sources from New York. In the available photo and footage of January 6th, Murray and Ng are not seen committing any acts of violence at the Capitol or entering the building. Murray watched as the doors of the northwest wing of the Capitol were breached by an angry crowd at 2:42 p.m. Around this time, he was standing beside former Michigan gubernatorial candidate Ryan Kelly, who was later charged for his role in the riot, while someone yelled, "We're coming for you, Nancy." Kelly is scheduled to go on trial July 31st, by the way. Earlier, as Murray and Ng marched toward the Capitol, Murray seemingly spoke with an unidentified rioter dubbed Insider 2330 by the group of independent researchers known as the Sedition Hunters, who have been studying video and photos of the rioters to identify the marauders. Insider 2330 was one of the first people to enter the Capitol. According to a member of the Sedition Hunters group, he and Murray apparently talked after Insider 2330 had left the Capitol building. The Sedition Hunters, who have shared their research with reporters in the FBI, provided some of the footage of Murray to Mother Jones. Murray and Ng did not respond to multiple emails, text messages, and phone calls requesting comment. Santos's office did not respond to inquiries about Murray's and Ng's participation in the January 6th protest. Let's keep moving on here. Former Queens Republican District Leader Philip Grillo, who was arrested in February of 2021 and accused of entering the Capitol through a broken window, tells Mother Jones that he saw Murray on January 6th. He was leading the charge up the hill. He was urging us on, waving us to follow him. Grillo says he lost track of Murray after seeing him on the Capitol lawn. Grillo admitted to the FBI he entered the Capitol, according to a search warrant application first obtained by the Daily Beast, but he claimed he was drunk and didn't realize his actions were illegal. That's not a great excuse, and it was kind of early in the day. Anyway, I thought they were there for what they were saying they believed were super serious reasons, but drunk too. Why not? Grillo is awaiting trial. Meanwhile, a photograph that the Sedition Hunters helped Mother Jones obtain shows the two Queens men talking at the entrance to the Capitol grounds before Murray headed toward the building at approximately 2:30 p.m. Last month, Grillo announced his intention to challenge Santos for the GOP nomination in the 3rd Congressional District in 2024. He says he still supports Santos, but doesn't believe Santos can collect enough signatures to secure a spot on the ballot. Though Santos has declined to disclose where he was while the Capitol was stormed, Grillo says that Santos later told him he had been in his hotel room during the riot. Interesting, because usually he brags he'd go the other direction. The day before January 6, Santos spoke at a pre-rally event and declared that his 2020 congressional election, which he lost by 46,000 votes, was also stolen. In a 2022 video of Santos at a Long Island GOP event, first obtained by Newsday, Santos boasted that, quote, he wrote a nice check to the law firm to see if we can help accused January 6 insurrectionists. Okay. No evidence of this legal donation could be located by Mother Jones. Santos's office did not answer inquiries from Mother Jones regarding this check or his whereabouts on January 6th. So, a donation scam, which he's done before and which Trump is famous for as well. A former acquaintance of Murray, who asked not to be identified for fear of career retribution, says that on January 6, Murray texted people pictures of the scene that day, showing rioters climbing the walls of the Capitol from a vantage point on the lawn. I remember thinking, what was Murray doing? This person said. Murray, who became a criminal defense attorney after leaving the police force in 2002, was a registered Democrat who began supporting Trump before his run for Queens District Attorney in 2019. He said in multiple interviews during that election. In a 2019 interview with the Queens Eagle, he declared, "We need law and order. In a civilized society, you have a problem with the police, you hire a lawyer. You fight the police there, not in the streets." Murray tweeted prolifically in the run-up to January 6th, once amplifying the slogan, "Fight for Trump." In a tweet sent out on December 26, 2020, which was accessed via the Internet Archive, he said, "We will be gathered outside our nation's Capitol building on January 6th, waiting and watching to see who has the courage to stand up for our republic and who the cowards are. Those who do not stand up for our republic will be voted out of office next time." He added 3 American flag emojis to his tweet, so 3 means he's actually serious. In another tweet that day, he told a critic of the pro-Trump protests, "Do us all a favor and just stay out of the way on January 6th. There already are enough cowards in Congress that will be there." Ooh, burn. Earlier that month, Murray tweeted, "I am going to ask President Trump to appoint me as Attorney General or U.S. Attorney, and I will clean up all of this corruption in government that is destroying our republic." Murray deleted his Twitter account after Twitter banned Trump from the site on January 8th, 2021. On July 25th, 2021, Murray spoke at a Justice for January 6th event held in Foley Square in downtown Manhattan. The flyer for the rally referred to the January rioters as political prisoners who were being, quote, tortured by the U.S. government. Murray was introduced as, quote, one of the attorneys that's going to be helping to defend the accused January 6th rioters. He called himself a fighter who will fight to the end. He did not mention his own presence in the January 6th mob. So that's an interesting omission. You'd think that would buy him credibility with them, but I don't know. He decided to skip it. But how about that? That's an interesting call. I'm going to ask President Trump to appoint me as Attorney General. Okay, sure. Why not? It's nice to have dreams. All right. That was interesting, to say the least. Other stories to share with you, of which there are many. This would be a shift in topic somewhat, but we've covered similar ideas here, but something I've been holding for quite a while from Amanda Marcotte, who I usually don't get to hold those stories for very long because they're so important to hear pretty much as soon as they come out. But this is a more long-term background type story that I think will just, enrich our understanding of the way the right's operating, in addition to all of the flashier stuff that's in court right now. Oklahoma Republicans paved the way for the Supreme Court to end secular education. I guess that's a warning about a line of cases still in the pipeline and yet to come. And I don't know whether, now that I think about it, since there have been such a number of cases decided and released lately, I don't know whether this is among them or whether this has made it to the Supreme Court or it's still on its way up the chain. Let's see what's going on here and explain the dynamics, since we haven't talked about it at all. A new taxpayer-funded religious school is a Christian nationalist move to destroy separation of church and state. Let's see if we can get an explanation of what's going on here. The latest addition to the Oklahoma charter school world doesn't seem like much of a school at all. Oh. St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School doesn't offer in-person classes. I thought that was extremely important, and we had to get rid of COVID-19 restrictions so that we could have in-person classes. I thought that was your idea. Despite the end of no in-person classes, despite the end of the pandemic that illustrated how crucial real-world contact is to education, its first application to be a charter school in Oklahoma was rejected because it failed to meet the not exactly high state standards set by Oklahoma law. If providing quality education to Oklahoma students was the goal, then the choice to approve this school doesn't make any sense at all. But of course, Oklahoma is run by far-right Republicans who are far more interested in pushing a Christian nationalist agenda than serving the needs of their constituents. Republicans didn't approve St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School to be funded by the taxpayers because of its educational value. There was only one shameless reason for this: to give the far-right Supreme Court a chance to destroy the separation of church and state, a founding American principle. As USA Today explains, the school will be fully funded by the government, even though the school will promote the Catholic faith and operate according to church doctrine. This doesn't just violate a state law requiring public schools to be free of control from any religious sect. It's a direct attack on the First Amendment, which bars the government from promoting one faith over another or over any faith at all. Indeed, this is such a flagrant violation of long-standing constitutional law that the Oklahoma Attorney General, Genther Drummond, who is a Republican, felt the need to speak out against it, warning that it was a slippery slope towards state-funded religion and warned that state school board members have exposed themselves and the state to potential legal action that could be costly. Oh, so he actually makes a little bit of sense, but they're going ahead with it anyway, of course. He's right, of course, but Oklahoma Republicans want the state to be sued. Indeed, the whole purpose of propping up this half-baked school is to draw a legal challenge with an eye towards giving the Supreme Court an excuse to legalize taxpayer-funded religious education. The end goal, which some Republican leaders barely bother to hide anymore, is to destroy the concept of secular education entirely. The state's Republican school superintendent, Ryan Walters, is not discreet about his contempt for the existence of secular, reality-based education, which would be the reason he has a job, but never mind that. His hatred of schools that teach real science and history is so intense, in fact, it makes Florida Governor Ron DeSantis look less fascist in comparison. During the campaign, Walters didn't just demand that schools whitewash history and complain that learning facts leads students to believe this country is an evil place full of bigoted racists. He also called for teacher training and real history books to be replaced with materials from the far-right Christian Hillsdale College. After he was elected, educators across the state started to speak anonymously with reporters about their new boss. Unsurprisingly, as he demonizes public school teachers as Marxist and falsely accuses them of pressuring kids into gender transition, he and his second-in-command, Matt Langston, reacted with a Donald Trump level of emotional regulation to these whistleblowers by sending out a letter complaining of victimization at the hands of those pushing pornography in schools, as he puts it. The link between Walters and Hillsdale is alarming, as investigative reporter Catherine Joyce revealed in a multi-part series for Salon. Hillsdale is the center of a Christian nationalist movement to replace secular public education with right-wing schools that promote Christianity, deny science, and teach kids a false version of American history that valorizes white supremacy. Charter schools are at the center of their strategy to destroy secular public education. Under the guise of school choice, charter schools can be used to siphon money out of public schools into private but taxpayer-funded centers that favor right-wing indoctrination over real education. Eventually, the hope is that parents will only have two choices left for their kids, a Christian nationalist program or no school at all. While there has sadly been a lot of success for the right's plan to privatize education, the First Amendment has been an obstacle to the goal of replacing secular education with religious indoctrination, madrasas, if you're Muslim. Charter schools are only able to offer themselves up as taxpayer-funded alternatives to traditional public schools by respecting the currently respected separation of church and state. After the 6-seat Republican majority on the Supreme Court signaled a total disregard for legal precedent by overturning Roe v. Wade, however, the Christian right has come to believe that they have a shot at blowing a hole through any other long-standing legal principle that gets in their way. There's little effort to conceal that St. Isidore, which doesn't even open until 2024, was started for the purpose of getting a First Amendment decimating case before the Supreme Court. Brett Farley, the executive director of the Catholic Conference of Oklahoma, told USA Today that they expect this to result in years of litigation, but our intention is to see this through because getting the government to fund religious institutions is a major priority for us. They already do fund them with tax-exempt status, by the way. As Lisa Needham at Public Notice reports, the Supreme Court has been chipping away at this particular program of the portion of the First Amendment for a while now. The court backed a high school football coach who held showy public prayers at the 50-yard line during games in a case in which Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote required ignoring decades of precedent. They've also ruled in favor of private religious schools demanding state funds to build playgrounds or for scholarships. Last year, the court went a step further by allowing an overtly religious school in Maine to get charter approval and taxpayer funding. This was supposedly limited to towns where there is no public alternative, but clearly the religious right feels the door has been opened to a larger decision permitting states to redirect public school funds towards religious indoctrination more generally. Most public attention on the education issue has been focused recently on GOP efforts to prevent public schools and libraries from offering a full and honest education to students. Across the board, Republicans are passing laws empowering the dumbest bully in the PTA to ban any educational material that offends her illiterate sensibilities, leading to bans on works by youth poet laureate and Amanda Gorman, books about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, and even a song by Dolly Parton because a parent didn't like the "free to be who you are" lyrics. Taking on Dolly Parton, never a good idea. In Utah, one hero parent trollishly forced the school to ban Bibles under the same one parent gets veto power rules. That was actually a good play there. Book banning is terrible, but it's only one part of the larger picture. Working through Hillsdale and right-wing legal organizations, the Christian nationalist movement has a plan to eradicate public secular education completely, replacing it with privatized schools that are more focused on right-wing propaganda and religious indoctrination than education. Such a radical transformation of America's education landscape likely felt impossible before, but now Christian nationalists have their opening. It's not just that Republicans have a Supreme Court majority. It's that recent scandals like Clarence Thomas's billionaire sugar daddy, the abuse of the shadow docket, and the leak of the Dobbs decision show that the conservative majority has no respect for the law it supposedly works to uphold. The level of corruption and right-wing influence is unimaginable, creating a real opportunity for the court to simply disregard the plain reading of the First Amendment, all to give Christian nationalists what they want. Good point, good thing to worry about and keep in mind. And once again, reiterating the ground truth that if you have a majority on the Supreme Court, you don't have to make any sense or apply any logic. You can just declare what you want to be the state of the law. If you're willing to stand up to the backlash and ridicule for it, you can give it a shot. All right, let's see. Other things that, some things I started discussing at some point and I left in the queue because we didn't finish them and I wondered when we would get back to them. But then, of course, too much happened and too much was bubbling up in current events to return to those things. But maybe I can take the 2-minute break to decide on what might be worth revisiting. In the meantime, I wanted to check in on Mighty OCD's comments about the earlier comments that I had made in response to Darwin and the air fryer top for the Instant Pot and Bed Bath & Beyond going out of business. He's got something on that too. This is obviously a particular interest for him. Bed Bath & Beyond was a 1-2 punch. How do you like that? In what sense? They got themselves in trouble by spending way too much on stock buybacks and dividends before the pandemic, and then Hudson Bay Capital Management came in and swept up the pieces of what was supposed to be an investment to quote-unquote save them, and then they ended up being bankrupt less than 12 months later. So, sounds about par for the course when it comes to these ideas of swooping in and saving things with venture capital. I mean, very rarely will go that way. That's just not what venture capital is actually built for. Okay, so We got our third and last break coming up, which is good because I'm actually running low on oxygen for some reason today. It's a lot of solo shows and solo time spent this week. But perhaps I can, I don't know, it's going to be difficult. I'm going to have to toss a coin or multiple coins to decide which older story that we began earlier do I think we can go back to, extract the most value from, and finish inside of the next 30-minute segment. We'll be back and see whether we change our minds about these things. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to that last segment, that threatened last segment of the Kagro in the Morning Show. Let's see. One thing I want to get on the record quickly, a message from our bird site friend Bobblespeak / Culture of Truth, who sent on the tweet from June 13th of Igor Bobich, who was speaking of the situation we discussed with the military promotions being held up by Tommy Tuberville. And he notes here this true but disappointing note that Dick Durbin had commented to Igor that it would be tempting to ask for unanimous consent for military promotions now that, I guess, Tommy Tuberville is absent from the Senate. I don't know under what circumstances. Maybe he was ill. But with Tuberville missing, it's a tempting idea, but he notes, Durbin does, that one of the unwritten rules of the place, and who cares about those, is you don't take advantage of a person's absence. Of course, eye for an eye. They do that to you, too, later on, and nobody really wants that to happen. That's true. Another GOP senator, of course, could also object in his place. That's also possible as well. And then you attempt to take advantage of his absence, and it doesn't work, and you piss him off, and he returns, so you don't even get the win out of this one. It's interesting, but lots of interesting comments follow on this. This was Igor tweeting in response also, by the way, to Jonathan Weissman, who asked that question. Why don't senators you see all those military promotions while Tuberville is out of action? How far are we going back here? He was responding to Andrew Desiderio, who said Republican leadership was counting on full attendance today, June 13th, to force Vice President Harris to come back to break the tie on Jared Bernstein. But Senator Tuberville missed the cloture vote just now, so Republicans are furious. Tuberville was, at that point, headed to Bedminster for Trump's event that night, so that would be pretty funny. So there you go. Steve Bannon speculating that he thought Mike Lee would step in to back up Tuberville in such a unanimous consent request. But other interesting comments here. Igor following up his own comment saying Armed Services Chair Jack Reed on why Dems didn't try to do a unanimous consent request for the military promotions. when Tuberville was absent because someone else would have gone down and objected. That's probably true. And then this quite correct note, Brian Fallon pointing out Harry Reid did this to a member of his own caucus, Ron Wyden, when Wyden was holding up an Obama nominee, and he did it when Wyden was missing to attend the birth of his kid. Wow. Igor doesn't remember that one and asks which nominee was it, and it looks like James Downey steps in to answer that question with an article from the Denver Post. Senators' hold on interior vote goes unheeded. Jeremy Meyer reporting way back when, but a pop-up steps in and undoes that. Plus, of course, the paywall. But that was back in 2007, and I wonder whether if I pocket this thing, we can then read it and find out who was the nominee and answer that question. And then move on to the other things that I wanted to discuss. Former Colorado Parks Director Lyle Laverty's, is that the right pronunciation? Confirmation to a top post in the Interior Department was pushed through the Senate on Monday, while a member blocking the vote was home tending to his wife and newborn twins. Blah. Well, it does happen from time to time, and it's disappointing that Democrats do it to Democrats, but then won't do it to Republicans. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I can't really tell you very much about that as to why they would do such a thing, but there it is, and it appears to be true, and that's interesting background for you. All right. Well, okay. Jumping back into pocket. So I did give some thought to which stories we would jump to. And I don't know whether it makes any sense to jump back to old stories that we read half of and try to do them over again and set the table by starting from the beginning again, or whether maybe now would be the time to catch up on what's happening in the UK so that Greg can rest for the weekend rather than study up on these things. We brought the subject up. Let's go see what's going on here. I'll start with the New York Times coverage of what happened with the arrest of Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's former leader, arrested in a financial inquiry. But this is all also happening in the context of a reconsideration of Brexit swirling, and of course the question of whether or not the rest of Europe would be even interested in allowing Britain to rejoin if they did in fact rethink Brexit. But this arrest doesn't have anything to do with that, as far as I can tell. But there's also a Boris Johnson angle here, and we'll lay out what we can here in the last half hour. The arrest of Ms. Sturgeon, the subheader reads, who resigned as leader of the Scottish National Party in February, follows that of her husband, previously the party's chief executive, and of its former treasurer as well. And he wasn't the former treasurer, is that right? Okay. Although I thought maybe that he actually was, but okay. But only because I may have misread this subheader a couple of days ago when I looked at it, not because I actually know anything about Scottish politics. Anyway, Stephen Castle is the reporter on this for the New York Times. Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's former First Minister and once one of Britain's most prominent politicians, was arrested on Sunday by police officers investigating the finances of the Scottish National Party, which dominates the country's politics and which she led until her unexpected resignation in February. And whenever I hear about investigations into the finances of a party like that, I start to wonder, does it involve Russian cash at all? And my recollection in reading this quickly from days ago was that it did not, but let's see where it goes. The news deepens the crisis engulfing the Scottish National Party, or SNP, delivering a new blow to its campaign for Scottish independence after the arrests of Ms. Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, if I have that pronunciation correct, Murrell, the party's former chief executive. Okay, he was in the party a party position. But then also that of Colin Beattie, if they pronounce it that way, Beattie, its former treasurer, in April. So a treasurer who was not Sturgeon's husband was arrested. Sturgeon's husband, though, was arrested because he was the party's former chief executive and she its leader. Both men were released after questioning and without being charged with any offense. In a statement, that's interesting, in a statement issued late Sunday afternoon, Police Scotland said that Ms. Sturgeon had also, quote, been released without charge pending further investigation, and swiftly after that announcement, the former First Minister proclaimed her innocence. To find myself in the situation I did today when I am certain I have committed no offense is both a shock and deeply distressing, Ms. Sturgeon wrote on Twitter. Innocence is not just a presumption I am entitled to in law. I know beyond doubt that I am in fact innocent of any wrongdoing. Well, it's not really up to you, but okay. The latest development is a dramatic fall from grace for Ms. Sturgeon, a popular politician who served as Scotland's first minister for more than 8 years until she announced she was stepping down. Recent events have cast a cloud not only over the SNP, whose poll ratings dipped after the party's funding crisis intensified, but also over its objective of achieving independence for Scotland. The prospect of an imminent new vote on breaking away from the United Kingdom, to disunite that kingdom, I guess, had already receded before Ms. Sturgeon stood down, but the investigations into the party are a significant setback to the pro-independence forces. Polls show that the Scottish public is broadly split on the issue. A clear and consistent majority for ending the centuries-old union with England has yet to emerge. In February, the resignation of Ms. Sturgeon took the political world by surprise and prompted a divisive race to succeed her that was ultimately won by Humza Yousaf, previously the Health Secretary of Scotland. However, Mr. Yousaf's efforts to establish himself as the country's first minister have been overshadowed by the recent escalation of the police investigation into SNP's finances. In line with standard British protocol, Ms. Sturgeon was not named on Sunday in statements from Police Scotland. The initial one said that, quote, a 52-year-old woman had, quote, been arrested as a suspect in connection with the continuing investigation into the funding and finances of the Scottish National Party, adding that she was in custody and is being questioned by detectives. Scottish police can arrest someone if they think the person may have committed a crime and if they want to question the person formally. The person can then be released while investigations continue into whether there is enough evidence for charges to be laid. That is a slightly different system. It was a little difficult to understand. A statement issued on behalf of the former First Minister said Nicola Sturgeon has today, Sunday, 11th June, June 11th, the way we would say it, 11th June as they write it, by arrangement with Police Scotland, attended an interview where she was to be arrested and questioned in relation to Operation Branchform. Don't know what that is, but we'll find out in a minute. Nicola has consistently said she would cooperate with the investigation if asked and continues to do so. Operation Branchform, the code name for Police Scotland's inquiry, began in 2021 and was reported to have followed complaints about the handling of £600,000, or about $750,000, in donations raised to campaign for a second vote on Scottish independence. A first referendum on the question was held in 2014, with Scots voting 55% to 45% against independence. It's another eyebrow raiser for me, and I just sort of wonder whether there's, so far, no mention of any evidence that this would be the case, but it would, I wonder whether it isn't considered a beneficial measure from the Russian perspective, like to sow disunity here and see what you can get out of it. I don't know. Okay, let's see. The authorities are thought to be looking into whether money intended to fight for another vote on independence was diverted for a different purpose, and to be investigating, the police are thought to be investigating why Mr. Murrell made a loan to the party. So it's not an investigation of whether any of the money came from Russia, as far as I can see. Okay, we'll just have to drop that idea, unless that falls from the sky at some point. Mr. Merle, who has been married to Ms. Sturgeon since 2010, held the post of chief executive from 1999 until March, when he resigned after accepting blame for misleading statements from the party about the size of its dues-paying membership. Mr. Beatty resigned after his arrest in April. After Mr. Merle's arrest, the British news media reported that the police had seized a luxury motorhome parked outside of his mother's house. That does sound fishy, but listen to this. Mr. Yusuf confirmed to reporters that the party had bought the vehicle to use as a mobile office for campaigns, officials told local news outlets, but said that he learned about the purchase only after he became leader. In a BBC interview broadcast on Sunday, before news of the arrest, Mr. Yusuf refused to comment on the police investigation, but pressed on the impact of the crisis. He said that supporters should absolutely be confident that despite having some of the most difficult weeks our party has probably faced, certainly in the modern era, that support for independence is still rock solid. Okay. It's just not a majority. Asked if Ms. Sturgeon was okay, Mr. Yusuf replied that she's in a good place and doing well for sure, adding that he had spoken with her to take advice from arguably one of the best politicians that Europe had seen in recent decades. When Mr. Yusuf won the leadership of the party, he was seen as the continuity candidate who would retain most of the policies of his predecessor. At that time, and given Ms. Sturgeon's stature, that was an advantage in the race that he narrowly won. But when the financing crisis escalated, all of that changed. Mr. Yusuf had struggled to emulate his predecessor's dominant political profile. The SNP's problems have encouraged the opposition Labour Party, which hopes to make gains in Scotland in the next general election that is expected in the second half of 2024. Ms. Sturgeon became party leader and First Minister in 2014 after the resignation of her mentor, Alex Salmond, with whom she would later fall out in spectacular fashion. A link to that spectacular falling out is offered. I don't remember anything about it. A member of the SNP from the age of 16, Ms. Sturgeon became known as one of Britain's most effective communicators and was seen as a sure-footed leader during the coronavirus pandemic. While leading the Scottish government, which has its own distinct powers, she outlasted 4 British prime ministers as she pushed for independence. Achieving that goal ultimately proved beyond her. For a referendum to be legally binding, it needs the approval of the government in London. Successive British prime ministers have refused to countenance another vote, arguing that the one held in 2014 settled the issue for a generation. The Labour Party says it would not change that policy if it were to win the next general election. At the time of her resignation, Ms. Sturgeon explained her decision by saying she was exhausted and had become too polarizing a figure in Scottish politics to persuade wavering voters to support independence. When asked by the BBC in April if the police investigations of Mr. Merle had prompted Ms. Sturgeon's resignation, Mr. Yusuf replied, "No, I believe Nicola Sturgeon absolutely that she had taken the party as further forward as she possibly could." And she just wanted to spend more time with her family, who were arrested. And so she got herself arrested, too, so she could... he had been released already. I'm just making that part up. All right, so no mention of anything weird or untoward here, except that funding had possibly been diverted from the campaign for independence to something else. And then the suspicion, I guess, was, well, maybe it was diverted to the luxury motorhome. It was, after all, parked in the personal property of, well, not their personal property, outside his mother's house, which is kind of a weird place for it to end up. But I guess it's plausible that they bought the thing as a mobile campaign office and then they needed a place to park it. And all right, that land was available, so they took it. So is it at all related to the other things that are going on in UK? Maybe not, but we owe it to ourselves to catch up on what those things are too. Let's see. The Canadians have provided us with this report, CBC News. on Boris Johnson resigning as MP, not as he did before. I guess stepping down and then or being threatened with a no confidence vote. I can't remember. Did he actually lose a no confidence vote or did he leave as prime minister? But he remained on as a regular member of parliament. But now that's over too. Boris Johnson resigns as MP after learning he will be sanctioned for misleading the UK Parliament. Lawmakers were probing the ex-Prime Minister's statements about COVID-19 lockdown gatherings. I can't believe that's what undid him in all of this. It's an Associated Press article, actually, running in CBC's news here, but we appreciate it nonetheless, and maybe there'll be some funky misspellings in here because Canada. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's quitting as a lawmaker entirely after being told he will be sanctioned for misleading Parliament. Johnson quit after receiving the results of an investigation by lawmakers over misleading statements he made about Partygate, a series of rule-breaking government parties during the pandemic. Remember that? His lengthy resignation statement contained a ferocious tirade aimed at his political opponents and at his successor, Rishi Sunak, that could blast open tensions within the governing Conservative Party. In the statement, Johnson accused opponents of trying to drive him out, and he hinted that he might try to return. It's very sad to be leaving Parliament, at least for now, he said. Johnson said he had received a letter from the Privileges Committee making it clear, much to my amazement, that they are determined to use the proceedings against me to drive me out of Parliament. He called the committee a kangaroo court. Their purpose from the beginning has been to find me guilty, regardless of the facts, Johnson said. The resignation will trigger a special election to replace him as the MP for a suburban London seat. Johnson, whose career has been a roller coaster of scandals and comebacks, led the Conservatives to a landslide victory in 2019, but was forced out by his own party less than 3 years later. He has been awaiting the outcome of an investigation by the House of Commons Standards Committee over misleading statements he made to Parliament about a slew of gatherings in government buildings in 2020 and 2021 that breached pandemic lockdown rules. Police eventually issued 126 fines over the late-night soirees, boozy parties, and wine time Fridays, including one to Johnson, and the scandal helped hasten the end of his premiership. Johnson has acknowledged misleading Parliament when he assured lawmakers that no rules had been broken, but he said he didn't do so deliberately. He told the committee he honestly believed the 5 events he attended, including a send-off for a staffer and his own surprise birthday party, were lawful work gatherings intended to boost morale among overworked staff coping with a deadly pandemic. The committee is expected to publish its report in the next few weeks, and Johnson could have faced suspension from the House of Commons if he was found to have lied deliberately. By quitting, he avoids a suspension that could have seen him ousted from his Commons seat by his constituents, leaving him free to run for Parliament again. His resignation statement suggested he was mulling that option and was highly critical of Sunak, who served as Treasury Chief in Johnson's government before jumping ship with many other colleagues in July of 2022, moves that forced Johnson out. Just a few years after winning the biggest majority in almost half a century, that majority is now clearly at risk, Johnson said. Our party needs urgently to recapture its sense of momentum and its belief in what this country can do. Johnson resigned hours after King Charles III rewarded loyal Johnson aides and allies with knighthoods and other honors, there's the misspelling, a political tradition for former prime ministers that drew cries of cronyism from the ousted leader's opponents. All right. Speaking of the various opponents and the various factions here, I also have here a piece, relatively short, might be able to actually squeeze it in, from The Guardian on this internal conflict for the Conservatives. Actions akin to mutiny, in scare quotes here. The Tories speaking out against Boris Johnson. A number of Conservatives have voiced anger, relief, or both since the former PM said he was quitting as an MP. And we have this from Peter Walker, deputy political editor over at The Guardian, from Monday, the 12th. Since Boris Johnson announced on Friday that he was quitting as an MP, The condemnation has been widespread, and not just from his own party. A number of conservatives have expressed anger, relief, or both at his departure from Parliament, some in coded words, some more directly. This from Rishi Sunak. When it comes to honors, misspelled, and Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC, H-O-L-A-C, the House of Lords Appointments Committee, or to make promises to people. Overrule the House of Lords Appointments Committee? Doing what? I don't know. You probably do if you're in the UK. Or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough. How do you like that? Tim Lawton, MP and former minister, says, my hopes for the future of Boris Johnson is that he will shut up and go away and let us get on with the business of running the country. Wow. Tobias Elwood, an MP and former minister, who says Johnson has departed in his own style, kicking and screaming with so much drama, inflicting damage as he goes. His actions are the ones that are akin to mutiny, it turns out. Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the Commons, says we have to be really strong about people who are attacking institutions, people who are attacking the House for carrying out its work, people who are attacking the media. The price of not doing so is going to be very grave indeed. More comment here. Grant Shapps, Energy Secretary, on Johnson's disagreement with Sunak over peerages. That's clearly what must have been in the balance in disagreeing with or the move to overrule the House of Lords Appointment Committee. I guess giving people peerages and entitling them to sit in the House of Lords, which I guess could happen to Boris Johnson, I guess, at some point, too, since the king was honoring him and his aides with various accolades. I guess if peerage is in the offing for any of them, they could jump right back into government, sort of, kind of. The House of Lords has a role for them. Anyway, Grant Shapps, the Energy Secretary, on Johnson's disagreement with Sunak over these peerages. Occasionally, Boris wouldn't be all over the detail. I don't know if that's what happened in this particular case. I think the world has moved on from what was quite a dramatic period under Brexit and, of course, under the issues related to COVID, the vaccines, and the rest of it. And that's a little less meaningful to me. Michael Grove, Communities and Housing Secretary, says Boris's decision to step down means he's no longer a member of Parliament and life moves on. Well, that's a statement of fact. David Davis, MP and former cabinet minister, says the truth of the matter is, ask around Parliament, ask most of the MPs, most people are fairly sure he misled the House. Michael Heseltine, peer and former Tory deputy leader, who says no doubt he will go out into the world and make huge sums of money, writing history as he thinks it was conducted. But it will have little to do with the reality of the mess he left behind. And then one unnamed senior Tory MP who says the pantomime has to end. He has to be stopped by whatever means, and the sooner the better. Yikes. Okay. So definitely tensions within the party there that will make it more difficult for, I don't know what. I guess could it make it more difficult for him to come back? Possibly. But I don't know. Boris Johnson is definitely a guy you never count out entirely. That brings us to almost the end of our time today, but now we've sort of figured out, at least got some picture of what's going on in the UK, and we can leave it at that if necessary. And but if there are further developments and they hold Greg's interests, well then fine. Let's see, anything else that we can sneak in here? There is something. Is this the one? It's difficult to know which one's which in these Twitter, or these, the pocket threads. But, yeah, it's going to take me longer than I thought to find it probably. And then I won't be able to share it with you. But, maybe this one is it. But you remember we were talking about, we read the article on food prices the other day, the one that my brother Mark had sent me about how in this sort of self-reinforcing loop for food pricing, and here when we abandoned the old doctrine, the FTC doctrine, that you couldn't negotiate special rates for yourself without expanding it to the rest of the industry. But Walmart had not only been, and other major retailers not only doing that, but had convinced the federal government to largely suspend enforcement of that. And I mentioned that there was a food marketing issue that was summarized in this Mastodon tweet, or toot rather, that I had read the other day about the Red Delicious apple. I thought that was an interesting thing. I gave it to you in the roundup, but I never did read the thing aloud, and maybe we'll do that over our outro music here. Denny, oh my goodness, how do you pronounce your last name? It's a Middle to Eastern European Slavic name that I'm not going to be able to get out here. Vrandesic. I have no idea. Sorry about that, Denny, but maybe one day we'll catch up and you can tell me. But this is more interesting. Still, the story of the Red Delicious apple should be a lesson about trusting the market. Yes, eventually the market would correct, but with a lot of pain. What's he talking about? He'll give you a link here to the Wikipedia entry for the Red Delicious apple, but here's the story, long short of it. Red Delicious was for years selected for storage and looks, neglecting its taste, which wasn't particularly delicious, as you may recall. Eventually, consumers noticed and stopped buying, but apple orchards take years to be replaced. In the late 90s, the industry lost more than $700 million, and Clinton bailed them out. I don't think I even remember that. The belief in the invisible hand needs to be moderated. Yeah, you all remember this interesting story here, which was that, the Red Delicious apple, not particularly delicious, but marketers thought it held up best, and they put it out there. But remember the days when you didn't have a tremendous variety of apples in the stores? Of course, the Honey Crisps came along and blew that out of the water. Thank God, it's a delicious apple. But you had to live near an actual apple orchard to have real variety, as I was lucky enough to do back in the day, growing up as a kid. I had all those great apples.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Well, Justice Putnam has access to a lot of them in the Pacific Northwest as well, but he's not going to be talking about that, I don't think. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes up next right here on Netroots Radio. What have we here? Oh, yes, look, it's a mention of the Goldilocks documents. They've got the right ones to try an Espionage Act case against TFG. Good, let's hear more about that.